We're here today again to celebrate something called Makers, Women Leaders in Action. And this occasion was brought forward by the Women's Connections Committee here at the Metropolitan Club Chicago, which I have the privilege of chairing. I'm Shanita Akintonde. I'm an associate professor at Columbia College Chicago, and as a member of this Women's Connections Committee, I'd like to take a moment to have those members please stand so that we can acknowledge them this morning as well. Thank you for all of your wonderful work in pulling this occasion together. And I must point out it's Renee's birthday. Happy birthday, Renee.
All right.
So now let me start by, again, introducing to you individuals who do not need an introduction, but I'm going to do that. The video set the stage that we just saw. That was Makers, Women in Politics. And to my right and your left, and to my left, your right, are two women who are not only steeped in the area of politics, but in business, and in what I call making this city run. We're called the city of big shoulders, but we might as well as easily be called the city of powerful women. Here we go. Teresa Mento. She is the 5th president and CEO. You all know what that term CEO means, right? Of the 110-year-old Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. As the influential voice for businesses of all sizes and industry, the Chamber helps grow our regional economic and strengthen Chicago's status as a world-class city. Teresa leads the Chamber's strategic focus on small business and growth. She has international expansion, technology innovation, and regional collaboration under her belt, just to name a few things. She is very active in Chicago's business and civic community. She has served on the board of Choose Chicago, director of World Business Chicago Steering Committee, the President's Council of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and a member of the Economic Club of Chicago, as well as an executive committee member of Farm, Illinois. I'm not done, though. Prior to that current role that she holds, Teresa spent 27 years in public service, working at the federal, state, and city levels of government, most recently as Chief of Staff to Mayor Rahm Emanuel. She has also served as Chief of Staff of the Chicago Transit Authority under our late or former mayor, Richard M. Daley, for which she is, or whom she is a distant cousin. I do my research, y'all, so there you go. On a personal level, she has a BA from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she is married to Michael, and they reside in Chicago. Let's give Teresa, please, a round of applause. Very nice, very nice. Okay, now to my left here is the Honorable Toni Prettwinkle. Ms. Prettwinkle is the Cook County Board President and has been a dedicated community leader for over 2 decades, providing what is called independent and progressive leadership, founded on experience, know-how, and a commitment to practice results. Toni has the integrity, forward-thinking ideas that needed to transform government into a world-class institution of which the people of Cook County can be proud. Do we feel proud of that, everybody? Because let's give that a round of applause, please. I think we wholeheartedly agree with that. Toni stood up, to the city's political machine. And despite failed first attempts, she prevailed. And I think that's going to be part of what we talk about today, everyone, this idea of trying and trying again and the persistence that is needed and having that kind of chutzpah to do that. She ran an improbable campaign against the political establishment and was elected 4th Ward Alderman in 1991. Do we have any 4th Ward residents in the room? There we go. Excellent. All right. Booyah. In her 19 years as alderman, Toni has improved the quality of life of her constituents by providing independent transparency and accountable leadership. She has done lots of things, obviously, in her current position as the Cook County Board President as well. But on a personal note, let me share this with you. Toni's progressive and independent leadership has earned her accolades beyond just the ones that I'm giving to you today, but here's a snippet of what some of them are. She was awarded the Best Alderman Award in 1993, 1995, 1997, 1999, it continues, 2005, and 2008. Wow, right? And in 1997 and 2009, she also was awarded the Leon Despres Award. So on a personal note as well, she holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, both from that little school, University of Chicago. Don't know if you all have heard of that one. She taught high school for 10 years before she was elected to the city council. So she and I share that academic background. She's also a wife and a mother of 2 children and a grandmother of 3. Let's again give her and Teresa another round of applause. Very nice. Thank you. So all of that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I think there are 2 in the room today. We're going to have a conversation. So while I have questions here that I'm going to be asking our 2 honored guests, we want to just remind you that, again, this is open to us hearing from you as well. So as Maureen said earlier, there are cards or slips of paper on your tables. We want you to please add your voices to this collective choir of conversation this morning, because this is an insider's view, an insider's peek at 2 ladies that we won't always, or maybe ever again, have an opportunity to do this with. So let me begin. I wanted to start by asking both of these ladies, what is it that led you to getting your start in this business, in your areas of expertise, excuse me? Because, you know, what I like to often say is that people come in at the end of the movie sometimes and they like to say what they think happened or why the characters are doing what they're doing without having seen the beginning. And so I think for all of us today, it would be very interesting to hear how you got your start or what made you put your toe into the water of the respective industries that you represent. So Teresa, I will start with you, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to be up here with Tony and Shanita, and that video actually was really spectacular. That's a great way to start the day. I'll start with what my longest career has been, and that's been in government since I'm relatively new to my current job. And I got into government, into public service, because number one, it's in the water down in Bridgeport, which is where I grew up. But more importantly, my family were public servants. My great aunt worked for the Chicago Park District. My grandmother worked for the Chicago Public Schools. My father was a Chicago firefighter. Many of my aunts and uncles were involved in public service, and so it was something that I grew up with. It was really part and parcel of what my family life was all about. And then when I was 15 years old, a woman named Jane Byrne was elected mayor of the city of Chicago. And so even though I wasn't sure I was going to go into what we like to call the family business, she certainly showed me that it was a place where women could go and be quite comfortable. And of course, I knew that from my great aunt and my grandmother, but not at the kind of level that I was able to become engaged. I spent 3 years on Capitol Hill. I spent 7.5 years with Mayor Daley. I spent 2 years with the University of Illinois lobbying down in Springfield, so I've done almost every rotation except for county government. And then and I spent 9 years at the Chicago Transit Authority, which was really a lot of fun. And then I tried to retire until Mayor Emanuel saved me from that boredom and made me his chief of staff. So we can talk about that later. But for me, it really was just a personal calling and really a family commitment. When I left government, I planned to take a good chunk of time off, and then the opportunity to interview for the job as CEO of the chamber came along. I threw my hat in the ring, and after a very, very demanding interview process, I was offered the job. And so my sabbatical was cut short, but I'm very happy doing what I'm doing because it really is an extension of the public service that I've been able to do my entire career.
Thank you. Tony.
Well, I can't say that politics is the family business in my case. I got involved in campaigns because I was invited to by my high school social studies teacher, Richard Harmon. He was working in the campaign for Katie McWatt, who was the first African-American woman to run for city council in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I grew up. So we put out yard signs and made phone calls and talked to family and friends about the candidate. And unfortunately, Katie McWatt didn't win. But when I came to Chicago, I decided I wanted to continue to work in political campaigns. And I did that in my neighborhood for more than 30 years, actually, before I was elected to office. I worked for a lot of good progressive independent candidates, and because they were progressive and independent, they often lost. So I learned an important lesson about running for office, which is you have to be prepared to lose. I ran for alderman in the 4th Ward in 1983, and I lost. I ran in 1987, and I lost. I won in 1991 by 109 votes out of more than 11,000 cast. So whenever I talk to young people, or anybody really, I talk about the importance of your vote. It was the margin of victory was less than 1%. So I love being alderman. I served in that position for almost 20 years. You know, there's some people in this country who believe in term limits. I'm not one of them. You know, it takes a while both to learn the job and to get good at it, even when you work hard at it. And we were able to do a lot of good things in the 4th Ward, rebuilding the communities that had been struggling, but it took time. And I think that those who support, I didn't really intend this to be a rant against term limits, but those who support term limits, which we don't have in the state of Illinois, need to understand that that change isn't easy, and if you really want to have effective elected officials, you got to give them time on task, as the teachers would say. And what I usually say is my view about term limits is, yeah, we have them. They're called elections. You know, I decided in 2009 that I would run for this job. It was clear to me that my predecessor, Todd Stroger, wasn't going to win, and that somebody who cared about the main business of the county, which is public health and public safety, needed to run. And I didn't see anybody else out there who fit that bill, and so I decided I would do it. And let me just say, I was in a primary in which there were 4 Democratic candidates, 3 of whom were African American, and 1 was the incumbent. And we began in about February of 2009. I decided I'd run in December of 2008. And we started raising money, so here's the dirty little secret of American politics. That is, the higher up the food chain you go, the more time you have to spend raising money, unless you're independently wealthy, like Bruce Rauner. And so we spent the first 11 months making calls to people who had been generous supporters of my aldermanic campaigns, where I raised about $300,000 a year. And starting with that base and then calling people who I didn't know. It's called cold calls. There is nothing more humbling than making cold calls to people to try to persuade them that you, alderman of the 4th Ward representing 60,000 people, ought to be president of the county, which has 5.3 million people. But we were able to raise, in the course of the campaign, $1 million and actually get almost 50% of the vote in the primary, which was heartening. On the job, we, again, face challenges of public health, public safety, and I've added to that those 2 critical missions, trying to work collaboratively around economic development and economic growth for our region with the counties around us and the city of Chicago, including the Chamber and World Business Chicago. So that's, in a nutshell, the answer to your short question.
No, I think we all agree that there's no ranting. Whatever these 2 ladies share with us, we are eager to hear. So to continue, Tony, you know, as Cook County continues to grow, what do you see as your role specifically in its development?
Well, as I said, the historic mission is public health and public safety. Let me talk just a minute about economic development. When I walked in the door, I said, okay, when I worked for the city of Chicago, I was in our Department of Economic Development. Who's bureau chief for economic development? They said there isn't a Bureau of Economic Development. We have capital planning and community development, building and zoning, and our workforce initiative, the President's Office of Employment Training. But they're all in separate silos. So the first thing we did was create a Bureau of Economic Development and try to focus on bringing those departments to work together cooperatively and collaboratively. And then we said we don't have any connection to the business community. So we created a Council of Economic Advisors, a couple dozen corporate leaders from around the county. They put out a report in April of 2013 called Partnering for Prosperity. And there were a number of sections of the report, but the one on government said, you know, your first obligation is to run Cook County government well and to be transparent and accountable. But secondly, you ought to work on trying to be a catalyst for regional collaboration and cooperation. So in December of 2013, we brought everybody together from the political leaders, the business leaders, and the economic development professionals from the 7-county region in northeastern Illinois at the Federal Reserve Building, and including the city of Chicago. So Cook, DuPage, the biggest counties, but then Lake, Will, Kane, Kendall, and McHenry as well. And we said, are we going to work together? And what are we going to work on? There was an agreement to work together. We started with a logistical problem, that is truck permitting, size, weight, and where trucks are supposed to be. There's a lot of congestion in our region because we're the capital of the Midwest. And also trying to help businesses that want to export. So small and medium-sized businesses that either weren't exporting or wanted to start exporting, because exporting firms have a greater growth trajectory than those that don't, those that just depend on the domestic market. So we've been working on that. An opportunity to support the metalworking part of our economy materialized from the federal government, so we're working on supporting metal fabricating firms. And there's a lot of, actually this is an environment where there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation, but that initiative is one that I'm proud of because it came out of our Council of Economic Advisors, and we were able to secure the support and cooperation and collaboration of our leaders in northeastern Illinois. On the public health and public safety side, real challenges. On the public health side, to create a sustainable public health system in this era of healthcare reform. And what we've done is created a managed care program called County Care for people who are Medicaid eligible. And that is basically people who make minimum wage or less. And that's a real transformation for us. We were a system of last resort. Now we're running a managed care program that includes not just us, our hospitals and our clinics, but every basically primary care, not-for-profit clinic that we could find around the county, all the safety net hospitals and all the academic hospitals, more than 130 providers in our network. And so, again, we moved from having a couple hospitals and 16 clinics to running a managed care operation that has more than 130 partners. That's a challenge, but it's the direction in which we have to move if we're going to survive in the changed healthcare environment in this country. On the public safety side, we put a lot of emphasis on reducing our jail population. You have to understand that the people in the jail are not serving a sentence, only 10% of them are. 90% are awaiting trial. I mean, when you think of the jail, you think people are there serving a sentence. No. And of those awaiting, that 90% are awaiting trial, 70% are awaiting trial for nonviolent offenses. So they're there for drug possession, prostitution, or shoplifting, some of the things people do to get money for their drugs, not paying their child support, DUIs, driving under the influence. So we've got a jail full of people, basically, who are poor and black and brown, who can't pay their bond. I mean, that's what we've got. So anybody in this room who was arrested, God forbid, and you were brought to bond court, you'd either pay cash or use your credit card or raise the money from your family. But the people in our jail don't have those resources, and as a result, they're stuck there. So 70% of them are awaiting trial for nonviolent offenses. Only 30% are awaiting trial for the serious things that keep us up at night, accused of murder, rape, or robbery. But again, for most of them, they're there because of their poverty. Because if you're a big-time drug dealer, let's face it, and you have $1 million bond, you get the $100,000 in cash and you're out. But if you're some poor jerk on the corner who's selling a couple joints and you get arrested, you may not have the resources to pay your cash bond. So people in jail are not necessarily, first of all, they're not serving a sentence, most of them, only 10%. And secondly, they're not necessarily the people who are the most dangerous, they're the people who are the poorest. And they are disproportionately black and brown. 86% of the people in our jail are black and brown. We had a delegation from South Africa that came to the jail several years ago, and when they finished their tour, they said, "Where's the jail for white people?" So we have some real tough issues in this country around race and class, which most people don't talk about, and they're reflected in our criminal justice system. So those are the challenges they face: economic development, public health, and public safety.
Wow. Thank you. You know, in my tenure at Columbia, I have diversity as a big portion of what I teach and speak to. There are some Columbia College students there who can attest to that. And I think what Tony just mentioned in terms of how that affects the city of Chicago specifically and the world in general is something that we have to keep top of mind. And as a segue from that further, Teresa, you are the first woman to lead the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, and it's a 111-year history, I believe, now. And so she is in a position now as a history maker, so not only a maker in terms of our title for today's breakfast, but a history maker in general. What do you find to be one of your, I'm going to say one of your biggest challenges in your current position? And then on the opposite side of that, Teresa, what is one of your biggest accomplishments you feel that you've achieved also in your position?
Sure, thank you. The challenges in my position right now, from a chamber perspective, is really engaging millennials and entrepreneurs. Millennials and entrepreneurs participate in society in a way very different than what many of us here in the room are used to. They don't tend to join clubs. They are independent. They're entrepreneurs. They work alone, maybe out of their houses. They might go to an incubator area. But it's very hard to engage them, not only as a member in our organization, but really in the larger civic fabric. Many people who are members at the Chamber of Commerce, whether it's a neighborhood chamber, a regional chamber out in Naperville or Aurora, or here at the Chicagoland Chamber, are not only just a member because they're going to get great education, networking, and advocacy support, but because they really believe that in our mission, which is really to grow businesses and employment in the entire region. And it's interesting, if you talk one-on-one with a millennial or an entrepreneur, they'll tell you, oh yeah, we care about that because where else am I going to do my business? What has been difficult to explain is that next step of, yes, but you need to be part of the conversation that gets us there. Tony was very modest in what she was able to accomplish with getting the 7 counties together to talk collaboratively and to actually work on some things. Never, ever, ever happened before in our region. Despite many efforts, CMAP does a lot of really great stuff, but more at the staff, the planning level. Metropolitan Planning Council has done a lot on housing and transportation. Tony took it up to the level where the decisions are being made and where resources can be allocated. Took a woman to do that. Let's not lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. I think that I think one of the things that I bring to the table now as a woman leading the chamber is that sense of real civic commitment from my background, but also that notion that collaboration is really what's going to make the difference moving forward. And so while we are working with Tony on a number of initiatives that she's launched, we're also going into those neighborhood chambers where we might find some of those millennials or those entrepreneurs. We have partnerships with 1871, with the Women's Business Development Center. Almost every type of organization like that, we have now engaged in a partnership with, a formal partnership, whereas before I got to the chamber, they were kind of out there as satellites, but not necessarily in a collaboration. And so I think that the big challenge is really taking this collaboration to a real outcome-oriented conclusion, but also making sure that we are fully collaborative and inclusive of everybody that's out there. Whether it's a very small business that we have nominated to be part of the CASE initiative, the Chicago Anchor Institutions Initiative, or it's working with the Urban League, or it's working with Naperville or Schaumburg or the Chicago Southland. That level of collaboration is so incredibly important in our success. Tony said we're the capital of the Midwest. I never really heard it quite described that way, and I agree wholeheartedly. But I think that in order to be the capital of the Midwest, we need to make sure that every neighborhood, every region, subsector, and really getting out into Wisconsin and Indiana is part of the conversation that we have. As far as the things that I've accomplished, I think that I have positioned the chamber to be viewed as a collaborative organization. Before I got there, not that my predecessor was closed doors, but there was a world here in Chicago where every organization sort of did their own thing. Some of them were headed by women, most of them were headed by men, but I think that being able to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to call so-and-so and invite them to our event, or I'm going to call so-and-so and ask if I can be invited to their event, to make sure that we really are all rowing in the same direction so that we can accomplish great things for our region. And you know, things are really scary right now. We're still, I mean, it's been a long time and we're still recovering from the recession. We have a new governor who is clearly shaking things up, whether you agree or not. He is taking no prisoners. And there's a lot at stake here for our region. And I think that everything that we can do to make sure we continue the conversation and collaboration, whether we fully agree or it's really just because we're trying to advance the ball, is really important.
Excellent, thank you. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start to ask what I promised I would, some insider tips kind of things. And I'm going to preface this next question by saying I read recently, men are never asked this, but I'm going to ask it of the ladies anyway. And if there was a man sitting here, I would ask him as well. Given your role as power players in the city of Chicago, Teresa and Tony, what about this idea of work-life balance? I mean, you're obviously working a lot of hours, you're putting in a lot of time, and we in the audience and myself want to know, what is it that you do to balance that? Tony, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm gonna reiterate your point, which is that men don't get asked this question. Especially men in politics don't get asked this question. You know, the short answer is with difficulty, you know, but I think it's true of anybody who has a demanding job. It's difficult to manage your work life and your home life. And especially difficult to find time for yourself among, you know, all the other family members that you're trying to be responsive to and engage. You know, I think it's a broader challenge, first of all, than just women, and secondly, it's a broader challenge than just politics. And, you know, it gets struck in different ways in different families. And I've been blessed to have a supportive family, so I'm grateful.
Excellent. Thank you. Teresa?
Love what you do. If you love what you do, it doesn't matter if you're working 24/7. And I have worked 24/7 in the most literal of terms, not only working for Mayor Emanuel, but also when I was at the Chicago Transit Authority, where our system ran 24/7. But if you don't love what you do, it's not going to get better tomorrow. It's not going to become more tolerant in a week or a year. Really assess what you're doing, and if it's a drag on you, if it really is upsetting your work-life balance, if it's hard to carve out that hour to do yoga or whatever, really think about what else you can do that really stirs your passion. You know, public service is not easy, as Tony can attest, but when you feel the gratification of making a difference in people's lives every single day, or when you have a boss that is inspiring, whether it is someone like Tony or Mayor Daley or Mayor Emanuel, you know, it really makes a big difference. Even when you've only had 2 hours of sleep, you still get up ready to go the next morning to make a difference. So love what you do.
Okay, well, these ladies, again, I'm moderating. They're the experts. You all look great, by the way. This was not easy. This is not, I didn't wake up like this, as many of you may have. We're early this morning. Kathleen, with the exception, she told me this morning she got up and she does this on a regular basis. This is an early morning breakfast, 7:30 a.m., but Tony and Teresa are the pros at this. They do this all the time. So let me continue by asking them both, what would you give, or advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? So now, you all think about this in the audience as well, though we won't necessarily hear from you on this. We're going to hear from Teresa and Tony. But if you could rewind the tape, what would you say to your 20-year-old self, given your position today? We'll start with you, Teresa.
2 things. Find your passion. Really make sure you pursue something that really stirs the soul. And then once you figure that out, start developing your own kitchen cabinet. Have a core group of advisors, men, women, old, young, in different sectors that can really help you navigate what society and your profession and your personal life are going to be like. Not just mentors or mentees, but really people who are peers or trusted, who are where you want to be or who are what you don't want to be, and talk with them on a regular basis.
Okay, good. Tony?
When I was 20 years old, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher for, I usually say I wanted to be a teacher since the day I decided I really couldn't be a cowgirl. So I loved Westerns. I thought that would be a great profession.
Love that.
So I was a teacher for 10 years. But 20, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I went to graduate school to prepare for that. And I would tell my 20-year-old self, be prepared to be surprised, since clearly I'm not a teacher and haven't been for a long time. And also be persistent. You know, I ran for office twice before I was elected. and again by 109 votes out of 11,000 cast. So if I had given up somewhere along the way, hadn't decided to run that third time, I wouldn't have had the interesting public life that I've had as a result of being willing to do that.
Great. Now, I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to transition to start to field questions from all of you who I know have been making copious notes, right, and writing questions down to ask of both Tony and Teresa, hopefully. So this question I'll start with you for, Tony, and this you may have already answered it. It's, what would someone not know about you by just looking at you? Now, I don't know about you all, but she just mentioned she maybe thought about being a cowgirl. I don't know if I would have guessed that, although maybe. But what is it that you would say that would be an answer to that, Tony?
So one of the things I do, speaking of work-life balance, is try to spend time with my grandchildren, who I love to take to all the places I took my kids. So that, spending a lot of time with my grandchildren is probably not something you'd expect. And the other thing, because I'm a history teacher, I love antique shows. So I try to get around to antique fairs and shows around the region as much as I can. I love it.
Yeah, that's nice. Has there been one specific antique that you've seen ever that just stands out in your mind?
I went to an antique show a couple weekends ago, Fox Valley, which was out in Kane, where is it? Kane County Fairgrounds, thank you, Kane County Fairgrounds. And there was a beautiful southwestern pot made by Margaret Tafoya, who was a really famous southwestern Pueblo potter. And it was beautiful, except it was $1,200. I decided that I wasn't going to spend that amount of money. But it was fun to go just the same.
Well, there you go. Is it still there? Can people get it for you? She likes that pot. Everybody.
No, it's twice a year event. So.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Teresa.
I have a very, very socially demanding job. Today, for example, I have a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. And it's pretty typical during the course of the week. And it's what I do, and it is my passion. I am having fun. But I'm actually very introverted. If I had to choose between sitting at home and reading a book and being out at an event, I'd sit at home and read a book, preferably about Thomas Jefferson, but yeah, or that period of time. But yeah, I'm an introvert.
Yeah, I'm reading a book now called Quiet. Has anyone read this book or know about that book? It's that excellent, and it talks about this idea of being an introvert and things that you don't necessarily assign. Yeah, write that down, Quiet. It's a great book. Okay, but we're not going to be quiet now, so questions, please. We can have them brought up. Two committee members, Janice and Lori, are going to bring them up here, please, and we will ask them of our wonderful guests. If we don't get to all of them, please note that we will do our best, maybe post this to see if we can find out the answers to them for you. Perhaps come to a Women's Connections Committee meeting and we'll talk to you about it there. So give us a second.
Thank you, Teresa. Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, these are nice questions. These are lots of questions. Thank you. Okay, so this is a good one. A recent study was done stating that there are more men named John that are CEOs than the amount of women that are CEOs in totality. How can women break through the clutter and reach the status the two of you have achieved? So I'll start with you. Great question.
I actually read about that study. It was kind of crazy. But I think that all the efforts that we put forth, women's affinity groups like this, electing women like Tony, putting confidence in a woman like me to run what is typically a male-dominated industry, are great and incredibly, incredibly important. But as we've learned, either through the civil rights movement, the women's right to vote, this stuff is generational, and you've got to really start instilling it in people at a young age. And so for every one of you that has kids or nieces, nephews, grandchildren, please make sure they understand the importance of balance, equity, and mutual support among the sexes. If we don't start teaching our little boys today that their sisters and their schoolmates are equal to them, and if we don't start teaching little girls today that they should be able to stand up to the boys in the class, then we're going to be having the same conversation in another 25 years. Mm-hmm. And so I really do believe very firmly that it is our responsibility as adult women and men to really reach down before you reach up, because I think that we've got to really kind of educate people who are coming up through the ranks.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, this question is for you, Tony. What encouraged you to keep going when you lost 2 or 3 times before? And so you touched on that a little bit, but obviously we want to go deeper, right? Get a little more insight, please.
Well, I don't know, the brutal way to say it is I was too dumb to give up. But, you know, when you're a kid, you're stubborn. When you're an adult, you're persistent. And I was both. So, you know, I knew that I would do a better job than the incumbent. And I decided I wasn't going to quit until I got the job. Although on the 3rd time, I told my family that if I didn't win this election, I'd find something else to do with our family time and resources. But fortunately, I was victorious. And as I said, I've been able to be a public servant for more than 2 decades as a result. So.
Excellent. Teresa, this one is for you. How can a woman get more involved in the Chamber of Commerce, and also, Tony, I guess also as a follow-up, in local government? But we'll start with the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, sure. There are so many networks. At the Chamber, we're a membership-driven organization, and so we do programming for our members, but also that's open to the general public. We have a business-to-business networking event every month. We do educational programming around marketing technology. If you're a really small entrepreneurial business, we offer free counseling services. We have an amazing consultant who does that for us. But really, get yourself out there and engage, whether it's an affinity group like this, come to our networking events, volunteer for a political campaign. Phenomenal way to get to know other people who share an interest, and also just to get to understand the issues that affect us every single day. I would say don't be introverted like me. Throw yourself out there. And I think that whether it's at the Chamber in any of our forums or events, if you look at the Women's Business Development Center, if you look at the Chicago Loop Alliance, the Executives Club, there are so many programs and events out there where you can either go and find an affinity as a woman or just really open up your network. I think Chicago is an amazing networking town, and there's a lot of opportunity to take advantage of that.
Okay, excellent. What about for government, Tony?
Well, I'd second Teresa's suggestion that you get involved in the political campaign. I began with the story of being a 16-year-old volunteer for Katie McWatt. But I always tell young people in particular, you know, in any election, there's always at least one good person that you could work for. And unless ordinary people invest their time and money in good candidates, we're not going to have a very strong democracy. So it's incumbent upon all of us not just to vote. I usually say that's, you know, necessary but not sufficient for good citizenship. You also need to work for good candidates and contribute money to them. And one of the things you heard in the video was that it's difficult for women to raise money, and that's true. Harder for women than men. Partly because it's men who are the givers, and they're more likely to give to other men than women. And that we as women don't step up and contribute to candidates, women or men, who we believe share our principles and values. And I think that's really important. You know, if you look at what's happened in this state, we elected somebody governor who's a billionaire and who spent, I don't know what, $30 million of his own money on the campaign, and spent a total of $90 million. I mean, if you don't want to live in a plutocracy, ordinary people have to get involved in politics, you know?
That is actually a great segue to this question. How do I make a personal connection with my alderwoman? They specified alderwoman. I have tried by email and phone calls. Ooh, who's your alderwoman? How do they get in touch with alderwoman? Who's not responding, apparently.
Okay, so we have a interesting system in Chicago. First of all, members of the city council, aldermen, are not really legislators. Take that back. You know, one day a week, one day a month you spend at city council meetings, but most of your time is spent in the ward. You're really the mayor of a small town. People expect you to keep the streets safe and to be sure that the schools are good and to get it's not just the potholes and the light fixed. They want you to help them find, you know, affordable housing and help their kids get into good schools. These are the kinds of things that people in a small town would come to their mayor for. So you're really, and I don't want to overemphasize this, but you're really a chief executive for a small town. But what I say is, you know, Chicago is like Europe in the Middle Ages. There's the king or queen downtown, and there are the lords and ladies in the provinces. And you have incredible discretion about how you run your province, as long as you're not plotting to overthrow the king. And it's really true. You have, where in the world would the members of the city council have, discretion over zoning issues or, interact, if they choose, so regularly with public schools and trying to improve the quality of their public schools and working with their principals or working with their police commanders. In most cities, the members of the city council don't have that broad range of responsibilities and opportunities to improve the communities that they serve. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you're hardworking and you have a vision for what you want and you're willing to work to try to achieve it, you can do tremendous things. On the other hand, if you live in a ward where the alderman is disinterested or not very hardworking or doesn't have any vision, you're kind of stuck because nobody downtown is going to do anything about it. What you have to do, frankly, is support good candidates in your ward who will respond to your emails and calls, or run yourself. God forbid. I mean, it's... Again, if we're going to have a strong democracy, people have to support good candidates they believe in, and they have to be willing to run for office.
This question is about how can someone get involved in decreasing or helping the number of black or brown men that are trapped in the criminal justice system, internships or jobs, or what might be a suggestion for that?
So, I said
that you might have an opinion on that.
Yeah. The jail is at the intersection of racism and poverty in this country. 86% of the people in the jail are black and brown. And furthermore, although Chicago's half the population of the county, 80% of the people in our jail come from the city of Chicago. Now, unless you think that the people in Chicago are more likely to be criminals than people outside of Chicago, that's a reflection of how our communities, black and brown communities, get policed. I'm telling you, they arrest black and brown kids for stuff they would never arrest white kids for. Whether it's, having a couple joints in their pocket, smoking dope on the street, hanging out. I supported a Latino woman to be judge, and she ended up at 51st. She ended up at one of our district courts. And she came to me and said, you have to understand that what's happening is they're arresting our kids, by which she meant black and brown kids, because the kids from Bridgeport and the southwest side come to that 51st and Wentworth courtroom. They're arresting our kids for shooting dice on the sidewalk and having a couple joints in their pocket. They put them in the criminal justice system for this. And I will say to you again, no white kid would ever get arrested for that. So it's how communities get policed, especially poor communities of color, is reflected in who's in our jail. And I can't do anything about the way in which our communities get policed, either in the city of Chicago or in our suburban cities, towns, and villages. We're just the recipients. But I'm telling you that the way in which, it's not just that the jail is full of black and brown people, it's how people come to the jail in the first place, right? And that's a function, as I said, of the profound racism that is still endemic in this country and which impacts who gets put in the criminal justice system and who doesn't. So my goal is to try to reduce the number of people who await the disposition of their cases in the jail who are accused of nonviolent crimes. Again, I said nonviolent crimes. But it's not within my power to change policing strategies. That's on the people who run our cities, towns, and villages. And that's a real problem in this country. It's not just here in Cook County. You can see it across the nation. Profoundly troubling.
I think most of us in this room share Tony's sentiment on this, and I know the Women's Connections Committee particularly, we have a philanthropic arm this year called Girls in the Game, which is focused specifically on young girls and how to keep them off of the streets and more engaged in finding leadership skills through sporting activities. And so that's what we're doing to address this. But one of the things that everyone hopefully will leave this room with today are thinking about ways that we specifically as individuals can get plugged into combating these issues. Okay, so this is the last question because then we have something called a Eureka moment that we're going to have everyone at their tables think about to share with the larger group. What's next for you, Tony? That's not my question. That's one of the questions that came from the sheet. Just so you know. What's next?
So after 19 years as alderman, at age 63, I took on the toughest challenge of my life. I thought the chances were pretty good I would have to do things that would preclude my re-election. Turned out better than I expected, and I didn't have any opposition, actually. So my joke on this subject is that I never ran for alderman, by the way, in which I was uncontested. There were always, so there are more people who want to be alderman of the 4th Ward than want to be president of Cook County, apparently. But you know, at the end of this term, I'll be 71, and at that point, I might want to do something less strenuous in my life.
Nice. What about you, Teresa?
Well, I'm only a year and a half into my new job at the Chicagoland Chamber, so my horizon for about 10 years is to stick it out at the Chamber and continue to make a difference for our regional economy by helping to create new businesses and grow jobs. So that's really what I'm focused on. And 10 years is about as far out as I can go right now.
Excellent. Well, just so you all know, the energy from these two ladies up here on this dais is palpable. I feel like electricity going through my body from both of them now. We want to continue with that, with this idea of eureka moments, meaning all of you who are at your tables, if you want to take a minute and just jot down something that you want to share with the larger group in terms of an epiphany, something that you have that you feel is important to discuss in a larger context, you can do that at this point in time. And then we're going to wrap up our morning activities at that point so that you all can get on with your days. So take a moment, if you don't mind, and just think about it. And the women who are at your tables who are either members of the Women's Connections Committee or who are not, and can float to a table that one is not existent at, we are going to jot this down, same way we did with the questions, and then you can just bring that up, and I will share with the larger group what they are. Does that make sense? So take a moment to do that, please. Thank you. And while they do that, we have special
oh my goodness. Okay, thank you.
And a special thank you for you. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Let me turn this off.
Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And thank you. My thank. I don't know, early voting just started yesterday, and you know there was a snowstorm, so I don't know. Well, actually,
Do we have any eureka moments that we are able to share? Do we have any? Thank you. We've got one maybe. That'll be our culminating one if that's the only one we have. One more minute you need? I'll give you 30 seconds. All right.
We'll split the difference, huh?
We'll split the difference. Sure.
Because this one is for you, actually.
Sorry. We have a large Small Business Chicago is our program.
That's a very nice thing to say. Yes, it's all.
Okay. So, 2 parts to that. One is introduction, and then one of the
Awesome. Thank you. Our survey.
That's not nice. Pretty good. Yeah.
Can you see what that is? Is that entrepreneurs?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, last call for our Eureka moments so that I can read them aloud.
Chatty group.
It is. It's good to see you all having these wonderful conversations. So this is just going to be a culmination, and these are just thoughts in case I didn't explain what I meant by Eureka moments, because you all are obviously having them at your tables right now. Just your thoughts as we close out with our honored guest here today that may have come up in our conversations. Thank you, Martrice. So that I can share with the larger group. Thank you very much. So here's what we have. More campaign involvement, financial support to candidates, essential for women to have mentors came up, the idea of collaboration, I've done it, we did it, and persistence. And then the other one that I think was echoed by both of our wonderful guests here today is to find your passion. So those are definitely Eureka moments that came up. The other ones that I have here are education is important, so get involved. That is something that I think, again, we all concur and agree with. The ultimate impact on families. So our conversations that we're having this morning, I think, have tentacles beyond this room is what this is saying, that everything that we're talking about has an ultimate impact on our families once we leave here. The criminal justice system, this, I think, says dysfunction, maybe, perhaps. That would be a word we would use. And this person didn't realize that 70 to 80% of those in jail are not serving sentences, that they're just awaiting trials. That was a Eureka moment for sure for many of us.
90%.
90%. So there we go, even a higher number. And didn't know that the chamber worked with entrepreneurs. So how many of you, by show of hands, are entrepreneurs in the room today? Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. So now you have an inside scoop on things that you can do related to the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Let me just say again in closing, you all, what my Eureka moment is. That these types of conversations are just extremely important. They're needed. They're necessary. I think that all of us, when we come and gather in these kinds of rooms again together with esteemed guests like Tony and Teresa specifically, but notwithstanding, we should feel different or somehow better than when we came into the room. And I'm hopeful that all of you agree with that. We are, again, today making history, not only because we came out in this wonderfully cold morning at 7:30 a.m., but because we got a lot of wonderful insight and a lot of keen information from 2 of Chicago's, again, most dynamic women, in my opinion, and I think all of yours. So let's give Teresa and Tony, again, a round of applause and thank them again for taking the time out of their schedules to join us this morning. If we didn't get to all of the questions, which again I don't think we did, we're going to put together a fact sheet, the Women's Connections Committee will, to kind of disseminate some additional responses if there are any that suss up that we didn't address. But again, we want to thank you all again for coming out this morning. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.